Hi, my name is Angela, and happy Black History Month. Happy Black History Month 2025. I put together a little bitty series here for Black History Month that is centered on the tradition of African resistance. And I decided to do this because I feel like there really is a need for folks to review and return to studying our history from pre-colonial Africa to present day. And as an African in the United States, it's particularly important to me that our folks can study and tap into the legacy of resistance to oppression, not only on these shores, but throughout the diaspora. That has been left to us and go into that legacy that's been left to us by our ancestors. We need to be able to understand why Africans in the United States should definitely connect with our relatives throughout the diaspora. And we are living in a time where efforts to minimize and erase Black history are well underway, and they didn't just start. So it's not like this is a new thing that's happening. This is something that's been on the ground for a while. I feel like the facts need to be available for folks to read, to study, to share. And our people fought their oppression. And I think a lot of people don't know this, or they minimize it, or they underestimate it because they don't know. But our people fought their oppression at every turn, from on the continent to where they were held before they were placed in cargo ships, on the ships, and, in the various different countries that they landed in. So, we have a history of resistance, and I think that this will resonate with people now because of the time that we're facing. We're dealing with the Gilded Age 2.0, and that didn't just start either. And so there's a lot to discuss, and it's a good time to bring this stuff up. So Black History Month, one more perfect time to talk about it. And our people fought their oppression. They continue to fight it in so many different ways, from hunger strikes to poisoning their oppressors, to work stoppages, to weaponizing media, which we are adept at, to armed rebellion. And I mean, how many people know that there were enslaved women who found ways to prevent conception for themselves and their sisters? Or how many people are familiar with Denmark Vesey of Charleston, South Carolina? I'm very proud to highlight the events and the people who embody resistance and embodied resistance. And these little pieces I've compiled are just a starting point. They're intended to be an introduction to folks who may not have previously encountered these histories, and also a reminder for the people who have. I will be including all of my source materials in the notes, and I hope that not only will people explore those materials, but also check those out and add to them, because I'm sure there's a lot of folks who have more comprehensive sources as well. So, there's a lot of history that gets covered, and a lot of different perspectives on that history. So I think that people will be able to, it's just a little jump off point. It's a little nugget, and people can add to it as they like. But please share them. Share these histories and rebut the misinformation that is not only circling around social media about who we were as a people, who we are as a people, and what we've done in resisting oppression, but also in real time. People are repeating some really heinous stuff, such as there is no cooperation throughout the African diaspora, particularly between Black and brown people, or Black and indigenous people. That's patently untrue. Patently untrue. And at a time when we are watching the demonization of our Black African relatives, of indigenous relatives, and of our brown relatives from Central South America, the Caribbean, Mexico, a lot of people are speaking in ways that don't make sense for us as Black people, especially given what we've been through on this continent. and what we continue to go through on this continent. We have a very long history of resistance and cooperation with other marginalized groups who are also resisting. So I think people need to know that. Teach the young ones. Teach the young ones. That's how the history gets transmitted. And we can't, as we are seeing, we can't rely on our public education, which is being compromised, to do that. And a lot of folks will tell you that they're in their 40s and 50s and 30s, and they're just now learning about Denmark Vesey, just now learning about Lucy Parsons, just now learning about that there are Black communists and Black anarchists. So share this history, add to it, and make sure these young ones know. Because I'm thinking about the elders who made sure, like my Uncle Jerry, rest in love, my grandma, people that made sure, my granddad, who made sure that I knew who we were as people, plus counselors, people at church. Like, these elders transmitted this history to us. And it's our job to make sure that our young ones know it. And also, I'm thinking about my grandchildren, who these histories are their birthright and a blueprint for them to hopefully not have to fight the battles that we're fighting now. Hopefully we get this right. But these histories are crucially important, and we need to be making sure that we're passing those down. So, all right, intro is over. Let's get into this little piece. And I chose the Stono Rebellion simply because I live in South Carolina. I wish I lived in South Carolina. And I am surrounded by history here. And I'm also married to a Charlestonian who is of the Gullah Geechee Nation. And we will be discussing them in a later piece in a couple of weeks. And so this is very important to me. It's very close to me. And let's get into it. The Stono Rebellion of 1739. We can't talk about rebellion without talking about the Ma'afa, which is the name given to the African Holocaust, also known as the transatlantic slave trade. And in 1482, the Portuguese built a fort that came to be known as Elmina Castle, and a place where it would also notoriously become the last stop for kidnapped Africans before they were herded onto cargo ships bound for the Americas and the Caribbean. I think that it's important to know that while some Africans, and this is something that gets circulated too, and we need to be very clear about this. Yes, there were Africans who dealt in enslaving their own people. That happened. But we have to be very clear that though Africans practiced enslavement, the form that existed on the continent was nothing like what existed in the Americas and in the Caribbean. It's more like indentured servitude. Enslaved people were expected to be properly fed, housed, and educated. Very often they were adopted into the family that had bought them, basically, and also were able to intermarry into the family and inherit property. And they were not dehumanized. I think that's a key piece that people need to understand when you're talking about slavery on the continent versus the slavery that came to exist in the Americas and in the Caribbean, is that piece about dehumanization, which was crucial to enslaving people in, what we came to call the New World. To strip people of their identity and their heritage and their folk ways, their food ways, the way they did their hair. That's something that is unique to the form of slavery that was devised by the Europeans. And so I think we need to be very, very clear about that. Yes, Africans did sell other Africans into slavery, but they had no idea of knowing, or no way of knowing, that the enslavement that they were selling people into didn't look like what they were used to. And also, just a note, enslaving human beings and living things is never, ever, ever acceptable. I don't think I have to say that. But no matter how well treated they might be, enslaving living beings is inherently evil. It's evil. There's no other word for it. So let's be clear on that. And slavery proved to produce big profits in the Americas. Y'all might hear my dog Possum walking around because she never gets restless until I decide I want to record something or I'm on the phone. But slavery proved to produce big profits in the Americas, particularly on sugar plantations in the Caribbean and in South America, which was grueling, unimaginably backbreaking, heavy labor. I mean, that's even putting it like that is an understatement. It was, like the life expectancy of people who were enslaved on sugar plantations was never very long. It was that grueling. And the demand, the sugar plantations in the Caribbean and South America, and also the tobacco fields of North America, also backbreaking labor. The demand for enslaved Africans grew, and eventually Spain and England got into the business of kidnapping and placing Africans in bondage. Africans became the choice for enslavement in part because indigenous peoples in the Americas and in the Caribbean were also able to resist efforts to enslave them. A lot of the time, they knew the land better than these European interlopers did and knew how to get away from them. And also, unfortunately, they were decimated. Whole tribes ceased to exist because of European diseases to which they had no immunity, having been, isolated people for so long. And so they had no resistance. You had things like smallpox and things like that wiped out whole peoples. So Europe turned its eyes to Africa and saw Africans as a great way to make money, and a lot of it. So the arrival of Africans to the shores of North America was documented, as we all know, in 1619. And Charleston, South Carolina became a major place for the importation of human beings. According to the excellent reference, Africans in America, America's Journey Through Slavery, 11,000, and I'm sure that's, not spot on, it's probably more, but 11,000 Africans were imported through Sullivan's Island, which is now, side note, the site of a beautiful memorial ceremony that's held every year. So folks know about that. But between 1735 and 1739. And many of those Africans were from Angola. And that fact is significant because these folks were known to be hard to subdue. And Angolans created communities on rice plantations outside of Charleston and obviously resented the bondage that was forced on them. And one of those Angolans was a man named, he was called Jimmy. And I'm sure that wasn't necessarily the name he was born with, but that is the name that he was given, the name that history has for him. And so that's what we're going to go with because that's all we got. But he decided to demand justice for his people in the most memorable way possible. And early on the morning of September 9th, 1739, Jimmy and 19 other enslaved people met on the banks of the Stono River, which is about 20 miles south of Charleston. My wife could probably give more perspective on that. I've never been to that area. I'm going to check that out at some point. But they said that it's about 20 miles south of Charleston, southeast or some such. So it wasn't in the city proper. And one of the things that they planned to do was to escape to the Spanish in Florida, particularly St. Augustine. And it's good to know that at the time, Spain and England were doing what Europeans do and beefing with each other. And so, of course, there's a war going on. And one of the ways that the Spanish understood to kind of disrupt what was happening in the colony is to tell their enslaved people, hey, if y'all can make it down to Spanish territory, we'll set you free. Big incentive. And we're also not going to lose sight of the fact that Spain is an OG colonizer. We're not going to lose sight of that fact. But in this case, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I guess, maybe. People did receive and get their emancipation that way, so that is worth noting. It did happen, and that is the goal that Jimmy and his little army had. Like, we're gonna get to Florida and we're gonna get free. And so yeah, and I have it in my notes that the Spanish were at war with England, so they weren't doing this out of the kindness of their hearts. They are an OG colonizer. It was a tactic designed to disrupt the colonies and to encourage rebellion among Africans being held in bondage. So once Jimmy and his soldiers reached Stono, they procured weapons by taking them from a store. They liberated the weapons from the store, and they killed the shopkeepers there. There were two white shopkeepers that were running the store, and they were liquidated. According to the Library of Congress, the rebels then raised the standard, which I would have loved to see. I would have liked to see the standard they created. But they raised the standard shouting liberty. And there was beating of drums, and, it was very martial spirit. And the small army moved south towards Florida, gathering black recruits around. Say that 5 times fast. Black recruits along the way, and killing white opponents. They reportedly did spare at least one white enslaver who was, quote, kind to his slaves, end quote. So there's actually a few accounts where that wasn't just an isolated incident, that whites who had people enslaved who were known to not be cruel to them were actually spared. So, and the army grew between 60 and 100 rebels, and was the largest rebellion of enslaved people in the British colonies prior to the American Revolution. Isn't that ironic? And the insurgents killed about 20 whites along their path to freedom. Eventually, though, unfortunately, the Carolina militia surrounded the rebels. They found them and surrounded them in their camp and attacked them, killing at least 14 of the freedom fighters then and there. And other insurgents who survived the attack were sold to enslavers in the Caribbean, because of course they were. These enslavers wanted to make sure they got the insurgent element out of the colony, thinking that would squash it, and simmer things back down. And the people that they did kill, there's accounts of them putting the heads of the insurgents on pikes and things like that as a warning to any other enslaved people that might think to rebel. Didn't work. Never works. But yeah, they did do that, and that was the intention, to kind of discourage people from fighting back. And I'm sure you're hearing my dog snore. She never starts snoring until I'm on the phone. Well, she snores, but she gets extra loud, so just ignore that. So yes, Jimmy and his band, his army, were captured. 14 were killed outright. Some tried to go back to the plantations that they had escaped from and were killed there. And others, as I said, were sold to slavers in the Caribbean. And the don't get it messed up. Like, the rebellion may have been ended, but the inspiration that black folks who were being held in bondage received from Jimmy and his army, that didn't go anywhere. People didn't forget that. And you will see, we're going to talk about more rebellions, particularly in South Carolina. I'm thinking of 2, Denmark Vesey and also Gabriel Prosser, that happened here in South Carolina as well. So the spirit of Jimmy and his army lived on, which I think is fantastic. So naturally, the white establishment, reeling from the rebellion, this really put the fear of God in them for like a half a minute. They were shook. And they enacted much more restrictive